In the fall of 1896, some of the students and faculty of Fairmount College in Wichita, at the time only a year old, had attempted to organize a team to play the rapidly growing sport of football. But after a game was arranged with Wichita High School, Fairmount students and faculty members had to recruit 3 or 4 non-students just to put 11 players on the field.
Football has already become established at Fairmount, but for some reason the proper spirit seems to be lacking. Boys, be loyal to your college. Don your canvas suits and work. The football record of Fairmount is at stake. The Sunflower, 1896.
In 1897, faculty member Theodore H. Morrison, who had played in the first attempt at football a year earlier, agreed to become Fairmount's first coach and organized a team which played the first official game in school history, meeting Wichita High School on November 20th. Fairmount won 12-4.
Hippity hip, hippity hess, what in the world's the matter with us? Nothing at all, nothing at all. What's the score? What's the score? 12-4, 12-4. Ki-yi-yi, Fairmount. Fairmount cheer after that first victory.
Another milestone was reached in 1898 when Fairmount played its first football game against another college opponent, facing crosstown rival Friends. The Quakers won 5-0 in the beginning of what would become a big rivalry, and the first actual football schedule for Fairmount was put together in 1899, a 5-game slate which produced a record of 2 wins, 1 loss, and 2 ties. The first decade of the 20th century would prove to be one of the most successful eras in the history of Wichita State football, as Fairmount College began the new decade with a 5-3 record in 1900 and established what would be a long-standing tradition, an annual Thanksgiving Day game with Friends. In 1904, a poster was being prepared to promote an upcoming game against the Chillicothe Indian School from Oklahoma. It read Chillicothe Indians versus Fairmount. But Fairmount what? Roy Kirk, student manager for the football team, was aware that many of the football players worked the wheat harvest during the summer months to make money for school, so he came up with the name Wheat Shockers for the poster. Although the name was not officially adopted for a number of years, it caught on quickly and was applied to all Fairmount teams thereafter. To this day, it is one of the few truly unique nicknames in all of college athletics. A year later, Fairmount was involved in 2 games which produced firsts for all of college football. On October 6, 1905, the innovative Roy Kirk came up with the idea to play a night game, known to be at the very least the first night football game west of the Missouri River. 30 Coleman lanterns were hung on poles along the sides and at the ends of Wichita's Association Park for a game between Fairmount and Cooper College, now Sterling. Curiosity caused the game to be well attended, and enthusiasm for Fairmount football grew as the Shockers trounced Cooper 24-0. But the experiment in the short term was deemed a failure, as it was too hard to see in the middle of the field. Less than 3 months later, Fairmount was involved in a very important experiment. College football was under fire from college administrators and journalists for its brutal roughness, and President Theodore Roosevelt had led the call for sweeping changes in the rules. One of the proposed changes was to make it legal to throw or pass the ball forward, with the hope that it would open up the game and cut down on mass plays which led to so many injuries. With the blessing of President Roosevelt, Fairmount received permission to play a special postseason game against Washburn on Christmas Day 1905, using the suggested new rules, and that game produced the first forward passes ever thrown in a college football game. Both schools have laid claim to throwing the very first pass, but it is known that the first Fairmount pass came in the first half, Ben Davis throwing an awkward 2-handed toss to Art Solter for a 10-yard gain. The results of the experiment led the Rules Committee to adopt the new rules for the 1906 season, and college football began to move into its modern era. From 1902 to 08, Fairmount posted 7 straight winning seasons with an overall record of 47, 17, and 4. During an 8-2 season in 1907, Fairmount established a record which would never be broken in the history of Shocker football, thrashing Christian University of Enid, Oklahoma 111-0, scoring 87 points in the first half. The architect of Fairmount's success from 1905 to 08 was Willis Bill Bates, a former standout athlete at Dartmouth, who was hired as Director of Physical Education and Athletics and coach of all sports. His 4-year football record was 28-8-3, including an 8-1 team in 1908, which lost only to Oklahoma. Following Bates' departure, football fortunes slipped during the second decade of the 20th century. Roy Thomas led Fairmount to a 6-2-1 record in 1910 and a Kansas Conference title in 1911 at 7-1. The Shockers also went 7-3 under Lamar Hoover in 1916, but those were the only winning seasons between 1910 and 1919. One constant during the decade was the importance of the Thanksgiving Day game with friends. It was the focal point of each season, like Army-Navy or KU Missouri.
Any red-blooded Fairmount man would rather see the Quakers in the dust, with the marks of wheat shocker cleats all over their faces, than to be mentioned in his rich uncle's will for $1 million. The Parnassus.
In 1912, the unthinkable happened. Highly regarded former Fairmount coach Willis Bates became the head coach at Southwestern College in Winfield, Fairmount's most hated rival. And even worse, his first Mound Builders team manhandled Fairmount 41-3. The Southwestern students proclaimed they now had a jinx over the Shockers, and to magnify the point, painted a grinning black cat on a white stone, labeled it Fairmount's jinx, and planted it in their graveyard of victories. Fairmount students unearthed the jinx and stole it, setting off a long series of thefts and recoveries which went on for more than a decade. The Roaring '20s were a little better for Fairmount football, as the Shockers recorded winning campaigns 5 times during the decade, and 1925 produced one of the epic games in Wichita State football history. Since the whole jinx thing had started with Southwestern 13 years earlier, the Shockers had only beaten the Mound Builders once in 12 tries, suffering 8 losses with 3 ties, bringing the record for the all-time series to 7 wins for each school and 6 ties. Therefore, the 1925 game was determined to be the decider as to whether or not the jinx existed once and for all. The Shockers won a hard-fought game, 13-7. The jinx stone was pulled from its most recent hiding place under the steps of Fisk Hall, and in a dramatic ceremony was crushed in front of the entire student body. In 1926, Fairmount College became the Municipal University of Wichita, and a 6-2 record that fall provided a bright beginning to the new era. The new Wichita U also moved from the Kansas Conference to the more difficult Central Intercollegiate Conference during the late 20s. The Shocker teams in the late 20s included Lester Faust and Herbert King, African-American student athletes at a time when very few colleges and universities allowed African Americans to participate on their varsity teams. Wichita State, under its various names, would continue to be a national leader in the development of racial equality in college athletics in the years ahead. From 1927 to 29, Shocker football was a mediocre 9-12-2, but it was about to be lifted out of those doldrums through help from the most prestigious and successful football program in the United States, Notre Dame. Jesse Harper, who had coached Notre Dame to its first significant football successes, had left coaching to become a cattle rancher in western Kansas and had taken an interest in the Wichita U program. He called his former player, protege, and successor, Knute Rockne, who had just coached the Fighting Irish to the first of 2 successive national championships, and asked Rockne to suggest a coach for Wichita. Rockne recommended 23-year-old Al Gebert, who was completing his degree in that spring of 1930, and who Rockne considered one of the smartest players he had ever coached. Wichita U, on the advice of Harper, hired the youthful Gebert. Gebert's debut was an immediate success as he led the Shockers, now running the Notre Dame system, to a 6-3-1 record in 1930, and over the next 2 seasons, Wichita went 14-5, winning back-to-back Central Conference titles. Through the decade of the 30s, the Shockers were 61-30-4 for a .670 winning percentage and won the Central Conference crown 6 times. Among the highlights of that glorious Gebert decade was an 18-7 win over Kansas in 1937, in the first football meeting between the 2 schools since 1902. Shocker Hall of Famer Harold Brill led Wichita to the victory over the Jayhawks, running 65 yards for 1 touchdown and throwing a 54-yard touchdown pass to Jakey Ogden. A year later, the Shockers performed on the biggest stage in their history as they traveled to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point to open the 1938 season against Army. Although they fell to the Cadets 32-0, the game was seen as a major step toward entering the ranks of big-time football. And while the football team didn't win, they were accompanied to West Point by their cheerleaders, and head cheerleader Corinne Bennett caught the eye of and eventually won the heart of West Point cadet Arthur Gorham, who later became her husband. In 1940, the Shockers went 6-4 against a schedule which included 4 members of the Missouri Valley Conference as well as Wyoming. and those successes led to the next step in the progression to big-time athletics, as Wichita U left the Central Conference to compete as an independent. But the Shockers slipped to 1-6-1 in 1941, and University President William Jardine recommended to the athletic board that Al Gebhardt's contract as head coach not be renewed. The board concurred. Thus ended what would prove to be the longest head coaching tenure in the history of Shocker football at 12 years, and Gebhardt's 68 wins would also continue to stand as a record at the school. His overall mark was 68, 40, and 6 with 10 winning seasons in 12 years. The search for a new coach was centered on someone with Kansas roots, and that search landed on Ralph Graham, an assistant at Indiana and a former Kansas State star, remembered in Wichita for running wild against the Shockers in 1931. Graham fashioned a 5-4 first season in 1942, including a 9-0 upset of his alma mater, Kansas State. The star of Graham's first team was halfback Lyle Sturdy, a future Shocker Hall of Famer who returned to kick off 100 yards for a touchdown against Washington University of St. Louis, and who was selected to play in the prestigious East-West Shrine All-Star Game in San Francisco at the end of the season. No football team was fielded in 1943 due to the war, but the sport was resumed in 1944, and the Shockers were 11-6-1 in the 44 and 45 seasons under Mel Binford, one of Ralph Graham's assistants who filled in for his boss while Graham was serving in the Navy. Making his debut as a freshman during that 1944 season was Linwood Sexton, still recognized as probably the greatest all-around player in the history of Shocker football. A graduate of Wichita's East High School, Sexton combined sprinter speed with power and a high knee-pumping running style which punished would-be tacklers. Sexton's impact was felt immediately as he ran for 4 touchdowns and threw for another in the first 3 games of the season. Those exploits would continue unabated for 4 great years, but unfortunately so would another trend which reared its ugly head in Sexton's very first game. Rockhurst was penalized twice for unnecessary roughness when tacklers essentially attempted to punch the Shocker star as they were bringing him down. Over the next 4 years, Sexton's courage and grace would make even more of an impression on those around him than his considerable talent.
I met Linwood Sexton in 1945. He taught all of us something about manhood in the next few years. John Stuckey, Shocker teammate.
In June of 1945, the University of Wichita was accepted into the Missouri Valley Conference, completing the transition into major college athletics. And although the Shockers played only 2 MVC opponents that fall, sophomore Linwood Sexton ranked 7th in the nation in rushing and became the first Shocker athlete to be named All-MVC in any sport. The 1946 season was one of the most eagerly anticipated in school history, due to the return of Ralph Graham and numerous pre-war lettermen from the service, the first real Missouri Valley Conference schedule in school history, and the unveiling of a much-awaited new stadium. Veterans Field opened on September 21, 1946, with an estimated 9,000 on hand, about as many as could be packed into the new stadium since the east side stands were not completely finished. The opponent for the opening game in Veterans Field was a powerhouse Tulsa squad coming off 5 consecutive bowl appearances. The Hurricane won 33-13, but what rankled Shocker fans wasn't the score, but rather Tulsa's excessively rough treatment of Shocker star Linwood Sexton. In the first half, Sexton was knocked out of the game on a high hit, some would call it headhunting today, by Tulsa's Hardy Brown. Sexton later returned to action, and in a subsequent collision with Brown, the Tulsa player was carried off, drawing raucous cheers from the Shocker faithful, which in turn incensed Tulsa followers. From that day forward, the rivalry between Wichita State and Tulsa would be intense and often bitter. That 1946 team was bolstered by the addition of jarring fullback Art Hodges, who had first been spotted by Ralph Graham when he passed through Wichita for a few weeks in 1943 as part of an Army Air Force training program. Hodges finished 9th in the nation in rushing in 1946, Sexton ranked 15th, and they led the Shockers to a 5-5 record in their first full season in a major conference. Also joining the Shockers in 1946 was halfback Anton Hap Hulick, a Navy veteran from New Jersey who had proved to have a knack for breaking big plays, including one of the longest runs in college football history, a 108-yard kickoff return for a touchdown that season against Arizona State. As if Sexton, Hodges, and Hulick weren't enough for opponents, Ray "Scooter" Morrison had also joined the team in 1946, and the freshman group in the fall of '47 brought in Eddie Krewell and Jimmy Nutter, giving the backfield 6 future Shocker Hall of Famers on one team. The 1947 team went 7-3 during the regular season, with one of the 3 losses coming in a 7-0 game at Tulsa, in which the home team banned Linwood Sexton from playing because of his race. Those 47 Shockers ranked 3rd in the nation in rushing and 7th in total offense. The team rushing average of 6.35 yards per carry led the country. Sexton, Hodges, Nutter, and tackle Paul Hauser all received All-MVC honors. Sexton was 8th in the nation in rushing despite missing the one game. Hodges was 15th, Nutter 22nd, and Sexton was 14th in total offense. On Monday night, December 8th, came word that the 3-year-old Raisin Bowl in Fresno wanted Wichita U as the opponent for 8-1 College of the Pacific in their New Year's Day game. The team quickly voted to accept, establishing another milestone for the program. Led by future NFL star Eddie LeBaron, the Tigers from Stockton, California defeated Wichita 26-14 in the Shockers' first bowl game appearance, but the season was still a tremendous success. Linwood Sexton completed his fabulous career as a 3-time All-Valley selection, honorable mention All-American, and the all-time WSU leader in rushing and total offense. The rushing record would stand for 33 years, and in a rare tribute, his number 66 was immediately retired right after the season. Sexton was not the only significant departure following the 1947 season. Ralph Graham received an offer he couldn't refuse, an opportunity to coach his alma mater, Kansas State, so Wichita State promoted one of his assistants, line coach Jim Trimble, as the new head coach and athletic director. Trimble led the 1948 team to a 5-3-1 regular season record, and the Shockers received a second straight bowl invitation, this time to face Hardin-Simmons in the Kabelia Bowl in Lafayette, Louisiana. Hardin-Simmons, one of the nation's top offensive teams, whipped the Shockers 49-12, but it was still another outstanding year. 4 Shockers were first or second team All-MVC, and end Mike Kanopik and fullback Art Hodges were honorable mention All-America. On Thanksgiving Day, 1948, a special ceremony was held to officially dedicate Veterans Field to the over 17,000 residents of Sedgwick County who had served their country in World War II. The 1949 season was a struggle, as the Shockers, plagued by numerous injuries, went 3-6-1, but the season did produce some special moments. On October 22nd, Wichita buried Northern State of Aberdeen, South Dakota 91-0. The Shockers led 19-0 before the offense ever got on the field, scoring 3 times on long returns. Jimmy Nutter eventually scored a school record 6 touchdowns in the game. A week later, the Shockers went into Skelly Stadium as a 20-point underdog and upset hated Tulsa 27-21 for their first ever win in the series. Eddie Krewell passed for a record 4 touchdowns, 3 to Nutter.
This one meant more to us than a Rose Bowl victory. We'll put this ball on display permanently and never let anyone forget this game or how our boys fought from behind and never gave up. Head coach Jim Trimble.
Krewell finished that 49 season second in the nation in total offense and 8th in passing. Nutter was All-MVC and led the league in scoring, and second-team All-Valley guard Aggie Oleksak was the only player not from a Big 7 school to make the INS All-Midlands team. In 1950, Wichita U bounced back from its first losing season in 7 years to go 5-4-1 as 2 of the greatest careers in Shocker history came to an end. Eddie Krewell departed with 12 individual records, including career passing yardage, which would stand until 1967, and career total offense, which stood until 1976. Jimmy Nutter was named All-MVC for the 3rd time, and when the Shocker football program was dropped 36 years later, he remained in the Shocker career top 10 in at least 11 separate categories. Nutter earned 14 letters in 4 sports and is still recognized as the most versatile all-around athlete in school history. In the spring of 1951, Jim Trimble suddenly resigned. One of his acts as athletic director had been to hire a college pal, Ken Gunning, as the Shocker basketball coach. And when University President Harry Corbin essentially went over Trimble's head to fire Gunning and hire Ralph Miller, Trimble quit as both AD and head football coach. A succession of head coaches followed through the 50s, starting with Bob Carlson, who was 5-13-1 in 1951 and 52. On September 22, 1951, The first night game in the history of Veterans Field was played against Miami of Ohio and drew a crowd of 12,500. Young Jack Mitchell, a former star at Oklahoma, became the next Shocker head coach, posting a 4-4-1 record in 1953 and then leading the Shockers to a 9-1 season and their first ever MVC championship in 1954. Those 54 Shockers went into Cincinnati in November and knocked off the nation's 10th-ranked team 13-0, ending the Bearcats' 19-game winning streak. Mitchell's success earned him an opportunity to coach at Arkansas and later KU, and he was followed by Pete Tillman, who led the 1955 team to a 7-2-1 record and a second straight MVC championship. Stars of those back-to-back title teams included All-Valley selections like halfback Jim Klesanen, fullback Leroy Hinman, quarterback Jack Conway, and Neil Sykes, and center Jack O'Toole. Tillman went from 7-2-1 in 50